Have you ever spent hours memorizing English vocabulary, only to forget it the very next day? Or maybe you've filled notebooks with grammar rules, exercises, and long lists of irregular verbs. Yet when it comes time to actually speak, your mind goes completely blank. If this sounds familiar, don't worry, you are not alone. Millions of English learners all around the world face this exact same problem. They study hard, they dedicate time, they even invest money in classes or apps. But despite their effort, their English feels fragile, easily forgotten, disconnected, and overwhelming. Here's the truth. The problem is not you. The problem is the method. Why traditional methods fail. Think about how most people learn English. Long vocabulary lists with translations, grammar rules written in black and white on a page, endless repetition and drilling. These methods may feel serious, but they fight against the way your brain naturally remembers information. The human brain is not designed to memorize random lists or black and white text. We are visual creatures. We think in pictures, colors, connections, and stories. That's why you can easily remember your favorite movie scene from 10 years ago, but you can't remember the 20 words you tried to memorize last night. So here's the good news. If you want to learn English more effectively, you don't need to work harder, you need to work smarter. And one of the smartest methods you can use is called a mind map. What is a mind map? A mind map is not just a diagram, it's a way of thinking. Imagine you start with one word in the center of a page, say travel. From that word, you draw colorful branches, one branch for places, airport, hotel, beach, mountains, another branch for activities, swimming, hiking, sightseeing, another for feelings, excited, nervous, adventurous. Suddenly, English vocabulary is no longer a boring list. It's a picture, a map, a story in your mind. Instead of memorizing 20 random words, your brain sees connections. And because your brain loves patterns and colors, the words stick naturally. It feels less like studying and more like playing. Why mind maps work for English? Let me tell you a secret. Your brain already works like a mind map. When you think about coffee, your brain doesn't see the letters COFFEE. Instead, you picture a hot mug, the smell, maybe the cafe where you usually drink it, and the conversation with a friend. This is exactly how mind maps organize knowledge. They mimic the way your memory naturally works, through association. So when you use mind maps to learn English, you're no longer fighting against your memory, you're working with it. Research has shown that using mind maps can increase memory retention by up to 30 to 50%, boost creativity and idea generation, make complex topics feel simple and clear. Now imagine applying this to English. Suddenly, learning is not about force and frustration. It's about flow and fun. The emotional hook. Picture this. Let's play a little game. Close your eyes and imagine this. You're preparing for a trip abroad. You want to speak English confidently. Instead of flipping through a heavy textbook, you open your notebook. On the page is a colorful map. At the center, a bright blue circle says, Travel English. Branches spread out like the arms of a tree. Airport, hotel, restaurant, sightseeing. From airport, you see smaller branches, boarding pass, check-in, customs. From restaurant, you see menu, order, bill, delicious. Each word has a little doodle, a color, a small connection to another word. You review it for 10 minutes. And the next day, when you walk into a real restaurant abroad, the words come alive. They flow from your mouth. You don't freeze. You don't panic. Why? Because in your brain, you can see the map. You're not recalling a list. You're navigating a picture. That is the power of Mind Map English. Breaking the myth, I'm not good at drawing. Now, I can almost hear your worry. But I'm not artistic. I can't draw beautiful maps. Here's the secret. Mind maps are not about art. They are about connections. You don't need to be Picasso. A simple stick figure, a basic doodle, or even just colored branches is enough. What matters is that you understand the picture and it sparks memory for you. Remember, your brain doesn't care if your sun drawing looks like a potato. It only cares that the image connects to the word sun. That's enough to trigger memory. Why this matters for learners worldwide. Right now, English is not just a school subject, it's a global key. For a student in Vietnam, English opens the door to studying abroad. For a professional in Brazil, English brings international clients. For a traveler in Turkey, English means connection with people everywhere. For someone in Japan, English means understanding the latest research or global news. But in every country, the challenge is the same. How do I remember and use what I learn? Mind map. English offers a universal solution. It doesn't matter where you're from, what your first language is, or how old you are. If you can draw a line and a circle, you can use this method. And once you start, you'll wonder why you ever studied English in any other way. The promise of this journey. In this video, I want to take you on a journey. Together, we'll explore why traditional learning feels heavy, how mind maps unlock memory and creativity, real examples of English mind maps you can create today, the surprising emotional shift from frustration to freedom. By the end, you'll realize English doesn't have to be a mountain. With mind maps, it can become a colorful path, one that leads you to fluency, step by step, closing the hook. So here's my invitation. Instead of fighting with long vocabulary lists, instead of feeling guilty for forgetting, instead of believing the myth that English is too hard, what if you tried something different? What if learning English could feel natural, visual, and even playful? That is exactly what Mind Map English is about. Stay with me, because in the next part, I'll show you the real problem most learners face, and why mind maps are not just an alternative, but the solution you've been waiting for. When we look honestly at the global journey of English learners, a painful truth emerges. Millions of people around the world dedicate years, sometimes even decades, to learning English, yet they still cannot use it with confidence. They attend countless classes, memorize endless word lists, pass grammar exams, and download every learning app available. But when it comes to a simple real-life conversation, their minds go blank. Why does this happen? Why do smart, motivated, hardworking learners keep failing to achieve fluency? The answer lies not in their intelligence, not in their effort, but in the very way they were taught to learn. Let us break down the most common problems that trap learners in this endless cycle of frustration. Most learners begin their journey with vocabulary lists. They are told, learn 20 new words a day. Repeat them again and again. At first, it seems to work. On the first day, they proudly recite apple, book, beautiful, quickly, important. But after 1 week, half of those words have already disappeared. After 1 month, almost all of them are gone. Why? Because the human brain does not naturally retain isolated data. A word on a list with no story, no image, no context is like a grain of sand slipping through your fingers. You can grab more and more, but they will keep falling away. This is why so many learners own notebooks filled with vocabulary. Yet when they try to speak, they cannot recall a single word. Another heavy burden is grammar. Learners are trained to memorize formulas: present simple, present perfect, past continuous, conditionals, type 1, type 2, type 3. On paper, they can complete exercises, but in real life, their brain freezes. Imagine standing in front of a colleague or a tourist and trying to mentally calculate subject plus, should plus, have plus, past participle. Wait, is this type 2 or type 3? By the time you figure it out, the conversation is over. Grammar, instead of being a helpful tool, becomes a cage that locks learners in silence. Think about the moments you remember best in your life. Was it a holiday trip? The first time you watched a powerful movie? A childhood memory with friends? You remember those moments because they carried emotion and vivid images. Human memory thrives on color, story, and feeling. Now compare that with traditional English learning. Endless black and white textbooks, word lists without pictures, grammar tables without stories. No wonder learners forget. Their brains simply refuse to store dry, disconnected information. The more learners forget, the more frustrated they become. They blame themselves. Maybe I'm not talented at languages. They compare. Others are improving. Why am I still stuck? And eventually, they lose motivation. Perhaps English is just not for me. The most damaging part is not the lost vocabulary or the failed exams. The true tragedy is the erosion of self-belief. When a learner stops believing they can succeed, they almost always give up. What makes this problem even more striking is that it is universal. This is not just the story of a student in Vietnam or Japan. It is the story of learners in Brazil, Mexico, France, Egypt, and India. From Asia to Europe to South America, the pattern repeats: years of study, little confidence, minimal results. It is not a personal weakness. It is a systematic flaw. Learners are trapped in a global method that goes against how the human brain actually works. Imagine a typical learner. She has studied English for 5 years. She has spent hundreds of hours in classrooms, thousands of dollars on courses, and countless evenings memorizing lists. And yet, when she meets a foreigner at the airport and is asked, "Excuse me, can you help me?" her mind goes blank. She smiles awkwardly, says, "Sorry," and walks away. Deep inside, she feels the sting of failure. I've wasted all this time. I'll never be good at English. This feeling is like holding a fake key. No matter how many times you try, it will never open the door. When we look closely, the root of all these struggles comes down to one word: connection. Vocabulary without connection to images is forgotten. Grammar without connection to real-life context becomes useless. Lessons without connection to personal emotions feel meaningless. Without connection, everything learned leaks away. This is the point where most learners either give up or desperately search for something new. The good news is, there is another path. A path that embraces connection, creativity, and memory. A path that transforms dry information into vivid images, maps, and associations that stick in the brain. That path is Mind Map English, and in the next chapter, we will see how one simple shift in method can turn years of frustration into a breakthrough of clarity and confidence. When we look honestly at the global journey of English learners, a painful truth emerges. Millions of people around the world dedicate years, sometimes even decades, to learning English, yet they still cannot use it with confidence. They attend countless classes, memorize endless word lists, pass grammar exams, and download every learning app available. But when it comes to a simple real-life conversation, their minds go blank. This paradox raises the most important question: why? Why do smart, motivated, hardworking learners keep failing to achieve fluency? The answer lies not in their intelligence, not in their effort, but in the very way they were taught to learn. Traditional methods ignore how the human brain naturally processes, stores, and retrieves information. Let us carefully explore the problems one by one. Most learners begin their journey with vocabulary lists. They are told, "Learn 20 new words a day. Repeat them again and again." At first, it seems to work. On the first day, they proudly recite apple, book, beautiful, quickly, important. But after 1 week, half of those words have already disappeared. After 1 month, almost all of them are gone. Why? Because the human brain does not naturally retain isolated data. Neuroscience perspective. Psychologists such as Hermann Ebbinghaus studied memory more than 100 years ago and discovered the forgetting curve. According to his research, humans forget up to 70% of newly learned information within 24 hours, unless it is reinforced with meaning, context, or emotion. A word on a list with no story, no image, no personal connection is like a grain of sand slipping through your fingers. You can grab more and more, but they will keep falling away. Real example. Take Maria, a student from Brazil. She once showed me her vocabulary notebook. 300 pages filled with English words, neatly written, color-coded, and even underlined. Yet when she tried to tell me about her weekend in English, she froze. She couldn't remember the word swimming pool, even though it was written on page 27 of her notebook. Her notebook looked beautiful, but it was useless in real communication. This is the tragedy of memorization without meaning. Another heavy burden is grammar. Learners are trained to memorize formulas: present, simple, present, continuous, present perfect, past, continuous conditionals, type 1, type 2, type 3. On paper, they can complete exercises. In the exam, they score high. But in real life, their brain freezes. Imagine standing in front of a colleague or a tourist and trying to mentally calculate subject plus, should plus, have plus past participle. Wait, is this type 2 or type 3? By the time you figure it out, the conversation is already over. Grammar, instead of being a helpful tool, becomes a cage that locks learners in silence. Case study. In 2019, a survey of English learners in Japan revealed that over 70% of students could pass written grammar exams, but fewer than 20% felt comfortable holding a short conversation with a foreigner. This proves the gap. Grammar drills may create good exam takers, but not confident speakers. Think about the moments you remember best in your life. Was it a holiday trip? The first time you watched a powerful movie? A childhood memory with friends? You remember those moments because they carried emotion and vivid images. Human memory thrives on color, story, and feeling. Now compare that with traditional English learning. Endless black and white textbooks, word lists without pictures, grammar tables without stories. No wonder learners forget. Their brains simply refuse to store dry, disconnected information. Example: ask a student to recite the third conditional rule. If plus had plus past participle, would have plus past participle. Most cannot recall it easily, but ask them about their favorite movie in English, say Harry Potter, and they will instantly remember dialogues, characters, and even whole phrases. Why? Because movies create emotional hooks that textbooks lack. The more learners forget, the more frustrated they become. They blame themselves. Maybe I'm not talented at languages. Maybe I started too late. Others are improving. Why am I still stuck? Every time they fail to recall a word, they lose a little confidence. Every time they freeze in conversation, they feel ashamed. Slowly, this creates a spiral. Study harder, forget again. Frustration. Frustration, less motivation, less practice. Less practice, worse performance, more frustration. Eventually, many learners stop trying. They accept a painful belief: English is not for me. Psychological damage. The most damaging part is not the forgotten vocabulary or failed exams. The true tragedy is the erosion of self-belief. Psychologists call this learned helplessness, when a person believes that no matter how hard they try, the result will always be failure. Once learners reach this stage, they almost always give up. What makes this problem even more striking is that it is universal. This is not just the story of a student in Vietnam or Japan. It is the story of learners in Brazil, Mexico, France, Egypt, and India. From Asia to Europe to South America, the pattern repeats: years of study, little confidence, minimal results. In France, the average student spends 7 years studying English at school, but only 39% feel confident speaking. In China, millions of students pass English exams every year. Yet a survey by EF English Proficiency Index shows that most rank only low to moderate in actual fluency. In Latin America, despite strong motivation, English is often taught with rote memorization, leading to the same cycle of forgetting. It is not a personal weakness, it is a systematic flaw. Learners are trapped in a global method that goes against how the human brain actually works. Imagine a typical learner. She has studied English for 5 years. She has spent hundreds of hours in classrooms, thousands of dollars on courses, and countless evenings memorizing lists. And yet, when she meets a foreigner at the airport and is asked, "Excuse me, can you help me?" her mind goes blank. She smiles awkwardly, says, "Sorry," and walks away. Deep inside, she feels the sting of failure. "I've wasted all this time. I'll never be good at English." This feeling is like holding a fake key. No matter how many times you try, it will never open the door. When we look closely, the root of all these struggles comes down to one word: connection. Vocabulary without connection to images is forgotten. Grammar without connection to real-life context becomes useless. Lessons without connection to personal emotions feel meaningless. Without connection, everything learned leaks away. This is the point where most learners either give up or desperately search for something new. The good news is there is another path, a path that embraces connection, creativity, and memory. A path that transforms dry information into vivid images, maps, and associations that stick in the brain. That path is Mind Map English, and in the next chapter, we will see how one simple shift in method can turn years of frustration into a breakthrough of clarity and confidence. After years of frustration, there comes a turning point. It often happens quietly, almost accidentally. For me, it happened when I stumbled upon a simple drawing, a colorful diagram made of circles, lines, and words. At first, it looked like a child's doodle, nothing serious, but that simple image would change everything. It was a mind map. Instead of long lists of words written in black and white, the page looked alive. One central idea in the middle, branches spreading outward, colors exploding across the page, small pictures decorating the words. And suddenly, I realized this is how the brain actually thinks. From linear to visual, traditional learning is linear, one word after another, one grammar rule after another, in straight lines. But the human brain is not linear, it is associative. It connects ideas in webs, images, and stories. Mind maps reflect exactly that. They mirror the way neurons fire in the brain. When you think of the word travel, your brain doesn't just store a single definition. Instantly, it jumps to airport ticket, hotel, adventure, backpack, souvenir. This is how memory naturally expands, through association. And a mind map captures this perfectly. The first experiment, I decided to test it. Instead of writing a boring list of 20 vocabulary words, I chose one word: travel. I drew it in the center of the page, added a simple picture of a suitcase, and started building branches. On one branch, I wrote airport and drew a tiny airplane. On another, I wrote hotel and added a little bed icon. Another branch, adventure, with a mountain sketch. Yet another, friends, with two stick figures laughing. It felt playful, almost like a game. But here is the miracle. 1 week later, I could still recall every word without effort. Not only that, I remembered them faster because they were connected like parts of a story. Why it works? The secret is that mind maps activate multiple parts of the brain at once. Colors stimulate visual memory. Images trigger emotional memory. Associations connect new words to existing knowledge. The branching structure mimics natural thought patterns. Instead of trying to push English into the brain through force, mind maps invite the brain to do what it loves: connect, imagine, and play. The learner's reaction. I once showed this method to a student who had struggled for years with memorizing vocabulary lists. Her name was Aisha. She used to spend hours copying words, only to forget them the next day. When I introduced her to a mind map, she was skeptical. "This looks like drawing, not studying," she said. But after building her first map around the topic, food, something magical happened. 2 weeks later, during class, she could recall more than 30 words without checking her notes. Her eyes lit up with joy. She laughed and said, "I didn't know learning English could feel like this." That moment was powerful. For the first time, she felt that English was not a battle to lose, but a world to explore. More than a technique, mind maps are not just a study trick. They are a bridge between logic and creativity, between memory and imagination. They transform language learning from a dry routine into an adventure of discovery. The discovery of mind maps marks the beginning of a new chapter. For learners trapped in frustration, it is the first glimpse of hope. The realization that maybe, just maybe, English can finally become a part of their lives. And this is where Mind Map English begins. The first steps were small. One simple mind map, one central word, a handful of branches. At first, I was unsure. It felt too easy, almost childish. Could this really work? But as the days went on, something inside me began to shift. Step 1. Food. My very first map was about food. I wrote the word in the center, drew a little apple, and began to build. Fruits. Apple, banana, mango, strawberry, vegetables, carrot, broccoli, onion, drinks, juice, milk, coffee, restaurants, waiter, menu, bill. By the end of the page, I had more than 20 words connected together, and when I reviewed the map the next day, I didn't feel the usual frustration. I could see the apple, taste the coffee, hear the waiter's voice. The words weren't just words anymore, they were alive. Step 2. Daily practice. Each day, I added a new map. Sometimes it was about travel, sometimes about family, sometimes about emotions. Within a week, I had created a small forest of mind maps. Something strange began to happen. When I listened to English podcasts or watched movies, I suddenly recognized words more easily. My brain connected them back to my maps. It felt as if invisible strings were tying everything together. And when I tried to speak, the words didn't hide in the corners of my memory anymore. They came faster, more naturally. Step 3. Real-life use. The true test came when I had to use English in real life. One evening, I met a group of tourists in my city. Normally, I would panic, afraid of forgetting words, but this time was different. They asked about food. Instantly, my food map lit up in my mind. I remembered menu, spicy, delicious, traditional dish. I used them smoothly, almost without thinking. The tourists smiled, impressed. I felt something I had never felt before in English. Confidence, emotional shift. That moment changed everything. Before, English had always felt like a mountain I couldn't climb. But now, with each mind map, it felt like I was building a bridge, step by step, plank by plank, across the mountain. The pressure disappeared. Instead of dreading study time, I looked forward to it. Making maps was creative, fun, even relaxing. Sometimes I added little drawings, sometimes colors, sometimes funny associations. English was no longer my enemy. It had become my playground, a story of growth. I once guided a student named Marco through the same process. He was preparing for a job interview in English, terrified of forgetting vocabulary. We created a mind map together with job interview. In the center, branches spread out. Introduce yourself, strengths, weaknesses, career goals, teamwork. On the day of the interview, he carried the map in his mind like a secret weapon. When questions came, he could recall entire clusters of vocabulary. He walked out smiling, and a week later, he called me with the good news. I got the job. That was when I knew Mind Map English wasn't just about memory. It was about transformation. The turning point. From that point onward, everything felt different. English was no longer a struggle of endless lists. It was a living network of connections, a personal map of meaning. The learner inside me, once tired and discouraged, was reborn. With every map, I felt stronger, braver, and more curious. For the first time in my life, I thought, maybe I can actually master this language. And that thought alone was revolutionary. Before using mind maps, vocabulary slipped away like water through my fingers. I would study a list of 20 words and forget half of them by the next day. But now something magical happened. With the maps, memory no longer felt like a battle. I could look at a single page and remember 30 or even 40 words, all connected like branches of a tree. 2 weeks in, I realized I could recall words I hadn't reviewed for days, because the images, colors, and connections anchored them so deeply in my brain. When I watched a movie in English, the change was dramatic. Before, I understood only scattered words, isolated and meaningless. Now, thanks to mind maps, clusters of vocabulary came alive. In a travel movie, I instantly recognized passport, luggage, boarding pass, words I had mapped just a few days earlier. Instead of drowning in a sea of unknown sounds, I finally felt like I was swimming, confident, in control. Speaking had always been my nightmare. My mind would go blank, sentences stuck in my throat. But with mind maps, I didn't need to recall single words. I could recall entire clusters. For example, during a conversation about food, I didn't just remember pizza. I remembered delicious, spicy, restaurant, order, bill. The words flowed naturally, almost like a script in my mind. For the first time, I could keep talking without freezing. Perhaps the most important result was invisible confidence. I stopped avoiding conversations. I started initiating them. Once, on a train, I noticed two travelers looking at a map. Normally, I would have stayed silent, afraid to make mistakes. But this time, I walked over and asked, in English, if they needed help. The words came out clearly. They understood me. We chatted for a few minutes, and when they thanked me, I felt a rush of pride. It wasn't perfect English, but it was real communication. And that was everything. The final result was joy. For the first time in years, learning English wasn't a duty, it was fun. Creating maps felt like art, adding colors, symbols, little sketches. It turned study time into playtime. And because it was fun, I kept coming back, day after day, without stress, without forcing myself. This was the secret I had been missing all along. When learning is enjoyable, consistency becomes natural. A story of proof. I wasn't the only one. Anna, one of my students, once hated English. She called herself the worst language learner in the world. But after a month of building mind maps, her perspective changed. She could now give a 5-minute self-introduction in English without notes. She could watch a TED Talk and actually follow the main ideas. Most of all, she smiled when learning, something she never thought possible. Her words still echo in my mind. English used to be pain. Now it feels like power. The big picture. Looking back, the results were clear. From forgetting to remembering. From silence to speaking. From fear to confidence. From boredom to joy. Mind map. English was not just a study technique. It was a doorway. A doorway into a version of myself I had always wanted to be. Confident, capable, and free in English. And the best part, anyone can walk through that same doorway. And here we are, at the end of this journey. But truly, it is only the beginning. Through Mind Map English, we've discovered that learning is not about memorizing endless lists or forcing ourselves into boring routines. Instead, it's about unlocking the power of connection, turning words, ideas, and images into a living map that guides us forward. Mind maps are more than just colorful diagrams. They are your companions in thinking, remembering, and creating. They give structure to your thoughts and help you see English not as a subject to study, but as a tool to explore, express, and connect with the world. But remember, knowledge only grows when it's shared and practiced. That's why this channel isn't just about lessons. It's about building a community, a place where we learn from each other, challenge ourselves, and celebrate progress together. So if this story inspired you, if you believe that learning English can be creative, simple, and fun, then don't stop here. Hit the subscribe button, join our community, and let's continue this journey side by side. Together, we will map out not just English, but the path to your future. Blast off.